So it's the start of the football season. We're expecting big things from all the clubs that we support and to be much better than last season. It is actually possible to predict where your team is likely to end up in the league. If you want to find out where that is, then watch the rest of this video. If you want instant access to new videos as they're uploaded, then please click on the subscribe button. Also, don't forget to comment on the videos. And if you're interested in learning more about BetAngel, visit betangel.com today and download a free trial. So I once saw an article in a newspaper where somebody said it was impossible to predict where your team was going to finish in the league. There were too many variables. And there'd be 46 matches in the Championship, League One and League Two, 38 in the Premier League. You'd have to work all of those variables to figure out how a team was going to end up in a certain position, and therefore it was impossible. And I actually wrote to this chap and said, well, it's funny you should say that, because actually I found a way of working out roughly where a team will finish in the league. And I did this many years ago. And the funny thing was, it was nothing to do with statistics as such. And I made the same mistake when first looking at the league to try and understand where teams would finish. And I started compiling very complex matrices of possible results and doing very complicated things to try and come up with a prediction of where a team would finish. And by accident I actually discovered that it was completely unrelated to all of that. And the unfortunate thing is the correlation that predicts where a team is going to finish in the league unfortunately is based around money. And that unfortunate fact means that a lot of teams in top tiers across Europe have absolutely no chance of being able to compete at the highest level. And basically, as we all know already, teams that have a lot of money tend to perform better. And I can't remember exactly how I came up with this idea, but when I had this thought, I went off and actually researched it and found out that that was actually true. The correlation was very high. Each year, 80 to 90% correlation in the top tiers are related to wage bill. And basically what that tells you is that if you pay a lot of money, you tend to get better players, and if you get better players, you tend to get a better team, and the better team tends to go on and win things. Not really a bit of a shocker there. But the interesting thing was the correlation was so high that if you actually ranked your teams according to their wage bill, then you tend to end up with the highest wage bill at the top of the league, and as you work your way down towards the bottom, you get the lowest wage bill at the bottom, and the 3 out of 4 of those teams at the bottom will get relegated. And it's just a fact of life in football. And you look at the structure of football, it's a bit depressing actually. I think maybe football should consider following the NFL and the way that transfers are done there. I don't know, maybe not. I haven't really considered or looked into it to any great depth because it's not going to change anytime soon. But when you look at it, basically the clubs that have more money can acquire the better players, and what has actually happened over a number of years is they actually acquire talent before it's become established now. So not only have we moved from this place, when I was young, I used to look at the pitch and think, well, I could be out there if I worked hard enough. But of course, that's just not the case now. I look out on the pitch now and I don't recognise half the names or where these people come from. And making it as an English player is extremely hard now. But typically what will happen is the large football clubs had started to acquire, it was probably around the late 70s, early 80s, is when they started to pay a lot of money for the top players and began to bring those players in. And that changed the face of football fairly significantly. But that has increased and increased, and of course, I remember Trevor Francis being the first £1 million player, and if you look now, when will be the first £1 billion player, you do begin to wonder whether that will happen at some point in our lifetime. But what clubs also do now is they buy all of the prospective talent and then immediately loan them out. So I was watching the Southampton v Vitesse match this week, and the Vitesse team had 5 Chelsea players in it, and these players are out on loan there. And Chelsea will bring them in when they feel they're ready to, or they may just completely discard them. But the fact is, they're under their control. So yeah, the unfortunate fact is, the more money you have, the higher league position you will acquire. And if you don't have the money, you won't get that league position. So, if you look at what happened over a number of years, a graph will appear on the screen. Maybe if I lean over here, a graph will appear over here. if you look at the wage bill from individual clubs, there's a very strong correlation between the biggest wage bill and clubs that actually go on to win. And if you look at a club like Man City, the way that they've ended up competing for honours is by spending more and more and more money. And if you look at this graph, you can see how the line on Man City has basically grown over a number of years and then reached a point at which they outspend everybody else and therefore end up getting towards the top of the league. If you look at Liverpool, the interesting thing about Liverpool is they have been performing very poorly in comparison to where they used to be, but they have been spending a lot more money. But the problem is performance and this correlation is relative. So if you spend a lot of money, you don't necessarily perform better because it's related to how much money everybody else is spending. So if you spend a lot of money, you have to spend much more than everybody else in order to compete on that basis. So yeah, it's an unfortunate fact of life. And getting into the Premiership is worth a lot of money now. And the amount of money that you get paid is absolutely ridiculous. It's crazy, the amount of money that players get paid now. But I'll pop up another graph here. And this is the average weekly wage by league. So you can see the Premier League has gone absolutely stratospheric. And they can afford to pay stupid money for stupid players. And, that's unfortunate because the effect isn't really rippling down. So it's rippling down into the Championship, but that's only because teams are trying to get into the Premier League. So they end up paying bigger and bigger wages to attract better and better players in the hope that they qualify for a Premier League. But if you look at the third and fourth tier in English football, that really hasn't trickled down to that level at all. So yeah, it's very, very difficult to compete with a Premier League team nowadays. But it's not all doom and gloom because there is a relative under and over performance that exhibits itself. After discovering this correlation, I had a look at which teams tend to over and underperform. And when you look at this, what you tend to find is that teams that are at the top but below that very, very high tier very often tend to underperform. So teams that are spending a lot of money and are in the top 10 can very often slip out of that. So, the best example I can give you is Newcastle. Newcastle have consistently spent a lot of money and totally failed to get value for it. But if you look at that sort of 5th to 10th place in the Premier League, very often you will get an underperformer from there at some point during the season. And likewise at the bottom of the league, what you very often tend to find is that you tend to get an overperformer there. Somebody that gets promoted, probably the shock of the new explains this. You may actually get somebody who gets promoted having a good season and they manage to outperform on that particular season. So if you're looking at an angle there in the promotion stroke relegation stroke championship winning market, you may find a bit of value in some of those situations. But you also may find value when teams perform badly through periods of the year. They may have a bad run at the beginning of the year or a bad set of fixtures, or they may have a good set of fixtures that overinflate their performance. So you tend to find that newly promoted teams that have a good set of fixtures tend to, their price on relegation tends to drift fairly quickly. So you can get value by backing a team that gets off to a good start to the season. But likewise, teams that perform poorly at the start of the season, that do have a large wage bill and the means to repair the damage to that, will generally, their odds will increase fairly dramatically because they're no longer in contention, but they may shorten again when all of that mess sort of gets sorted out, or they sack their manager and bring a new one in. Plus you've also got the mid-season transfer window where they can actually bring in players to patch up injuries or other issues that are taking place. So there's a few angles for you there. I trade the relegation markets very regularly. I may trade the championship, that's where that slip came from. I may trade the championship market or the promotion market in a league if I think there's an opportunity there. But typically it's, I like relegation markets. They're relatively easy to trade in comparison. But when teams go through a period of out or lower performance, then you can probably benefit from that as well over the course of the season. There are patterns to the way the season unfolds as well. I'll talk about those in another video, but what I wanted to talk to you about in this video was just how money is dominating the leagues now, especially the Premier League. And basically, we all go into the season full of optimism, but we have to be realistic. And the fact is that teams that are willing to pay stupid money for top players will probably outperform over the course of the season. They will get a much better result come the end of the season, even if there's a temporary dip in form. So, you know, when you look at qualifying for Europe or whatever, it's a hope, but unfortunately there's a lot of competition there, and unless if you spend a lot of money, you're not really going to get a result. So, you know, you need a good manager, obviously, you need good players and so on, but ultimately you're going to have to spend a lot of money to get a result on that. So anyway, I wanted to send that message out and give you some realistic expectations of the season. If you've just been promoted, it's going to be a battle against relegation for most of the season. It's unlikely anything else will happen. But if you can stay up, then obviously the reward is great, because you can build on that from the following season. And if you're looking for an area of over and underperformance, teams towards the bottom that haven't spent much, there's usually one team of those that will outperform this year. And likewise, there'll be a team in that top 10 that is going to seriously underperform for a number of reasons. It could be a change of ownership, it could be sacking their manager too early, or player problems, injuries. There could be any number of issues. But you tend to find by the end of the season, most of these have reverted to mean. And the correlation between wages and final league position is about 80 to 90% most seasons. So it's very strong. So anyway, thought I'd give that to you at the beginning of the season. Hopefully you can use that information. If you're interested in learning more about BetAngel, visit betangel.com and download a free trial today.